This is the first time since the height of the George Floyd protests where the coronavirus pandemic did not feel like the top issue of the 2020 presidential election. That shift was evident Monday when Biden delivered a major address in response to the urban unrest that has gripped some American cities, most recently Kenosha, Wisconsin. Now, Adam, if you can summarize for the listener, this felt like a major speech for Joe Biden, a major milestone, one that a lot of people in media, including left of center analysts, I would say, were calling on him to make, to unequivocally denounce the violence seen in some cities. And even if he's done it before, to make a major address. It seemed like he satisfied that requirement. How, though, does this, if you could summarize the speech, and how do you think that this issue set, talking about the way Donald Trump would call it, law and order on the campaign trail, how does that change the election?
Yeah, I think it is important to point out what you kind of alluded to, Alex, is that, I mean, really the substance of what Joe Biden said on Monday really wasn't all that new. He's been, really hitting a lot of the same notes, really, throughout all of these protests and civil unrest that we've seen over the course of the past few months, where, he's very, sympathetic to the protesters. He's criticized the police officers who have been involved in these shootings. He's empathizing with the case of, the overwhelming majority of peaceful protesters, but, obviously also drawing the line at, the violence and the looting that we've seen in these cities and condemning that. He's done that, kind of more in press releases and some of the limited TV interviews he's done. But what a lot of Democrats really wanted to see, particularly after law and order was such a major theme of the Republican convention last week, was just to emphasize that more and do it in sort of a bigger and more pronounced way that more people, more voters would actually see. And that's what you kind of saw with that big speech Monday afternoon. He actually traveled to Pennsylvania. That was really the first major public appearance he's made outside of his home state of Delaware in quite some time. And just sort of repeating those, again, those points that he's been making, that, supporting the protesters, the peaceful protesters, that is, criticizing the police officers who have been involved in the shootings, while also making the point of saying that most cops are good cops and are, I think he actually, made the line that it's the good cops that want to get rid of these bad cops more than anybody else. So, he's being careful not to alienate law enforcement and voters who, are still supporting police officers throughout this ordeal, but then also, very strongly condemning the violence and the looting that we've seen. And the Biden campaign then quickly turned that into that part of the speech into a minute-long TV ad that they're spending loads of money on this week in key battleground states. So I think he really did satisfy a lot of worried Democrats who, thought he had the right message, but just wasn't getting it out there enough. Because I think, as these protests again and have sort of entered the headlines with the Jacob Blake shooting in Kenosha, there's some fear that among Democrats that Trump could sort of take advantage of this and and that a law and order campaign, could end up working in his favor, bringing over maybe some of those voters who are a little skeptical of him back into the fold. But obviously that, has really not played out so far in some of the polls that we've seen. I think we'll get into that a little bit later. But really, Joe Biden is really in the mainstream of public opinion on a lot of this. And I think Democrats just wanted him to just get out there and make that very pointed. And I think for a lot of members of the party, that mission was accomplished on Monday.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like the Biden campaign was facing something of a strategic dilemma, right? Because the problem, even if you had all these voices on the left saying that Biden needed to ride out and meet this challenge head on, and a speech like the one he delivered Monday, look, the drawback of something like that is that you are acknowledging and in some ways helping shift the issues of what this campaign is about. And clearly, the Biden campaign would like the coronavirus pandemic and Donald Trump's response to it to be front and center. And you saw that throughout the convention. You've seen that throughout their advertising, throughout the advertising of some of their allies on the independent expenditure side. That's where they want the focus to be. But it was, I feel like, an acknowledgement Monday that this issue is not just something that exists online. This is creeping up in terms of importance to voters, maybe even to suburban voters, like you hear some political operatives talk about that they see in their focus groups and some of their polling, that this is rising as an issue there. And so they wrote out to, in a sort of almost quasi-dramatic way, almost like a West Wing way, where you give a big speech in response to something. It doesn't always work out that way in actual reality in politics, and that's not always the wise political move. But I did see the Biden campaign, I thought, try to do three things. They did try to meet the challenge head on, and I really think Biden's saying that the people who do engage in looting or any kind of other violence should be prosecuted to the full extent. I felt like he then tried to say that the real instigator in this situation was Donald Trump, to suggest that that how possibly can Trump solve this problem when he's already president and you have these kinds of problems, and his rhetoric in some ways, in Biden's words, foments some of this unrest. And then at the same time, and I thought this was interesting, he tried to broaden the definition of safety and security, right? I mean, Trump wants this to be a focus on your physical security of you and your family and your suburban home, more or less. And Biden, I think, broadened the discussion to talk about not just physical safety, but financial security, right? And he talked about Social Security in this speech that you and I think, Adam, were G-chatting each other during, we're kind of wondering what's going on here. Why is he talking about Social Security? Well, this week he just released an ad focused on Social Security, I think pretty clearly aimed at keeping the group of seniors who have swung toward him in his camp. So it felt, Adam, like it was an effective speech. I guess we have to wait and see. It was telling to me that they took that speech and put it in the ads, like you mentioned, seemingly a good sign that the campaign thought this went well.
Right. And to your point, not only did Joe Biden just simply kind of defend himself from the attacks that Donald Trump and his Republican allies have been targeting him with, that, you're not going to be safe in Joe Biden's America. We've heard a lot of that from the Republicans, but then, really went on the offensive and saying, no, we're actually not safe right now under Donald Trump's America. And that's not only with, the civil unrest that we see in the cities that, Joe Biden is making the case that the president has played a big part in stoking, but also on all these other issues, the coronavirus pandemic, the economy, Social Security, all of these things, and just sort of wrapping that up into a cohesive argument that wasn't just defending himself, but also going on the attack against Donald Trump, which, I think that makes for an effective TV ad.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like a big point of what Biden was trying to accomplish was not to seem defensive about this, as if he was for some reason to blame, and to really switch the focus back on the president. Brian, we saw this last week, and we, in fact, had a podcast with our White House correspondents, Michael Wollner and Francesca Chambers, where we talked about, it seemed like the most important thing to happen at last week's Republican convention was that the GOP finally settled on an anti-Biden message. And it wasn't going to be talking about how he was senile. It was going to be talking about how in Joe Biden's America, you won't be safe. It feels like, and you have some reporting on this, and it feels like some of this has even happened with Trump and Trump surrogates visiting North Carolina, that they have tried to continue this message throughout this week.
Yeah, Mike Pence is visiting North Carolina on Thursday and receiving an endorsement from a law enforcement benevolent association, where he's going to deliver remarks at a Cops for Trump event, where he's going to talk about law and order. In Raleigh, North Carolina, there's been protests that have created some violence, some destruction of property. And so, you see it up and down the ballot here in North Carolina, from the state Republican Party talking about leftist rioters, and the need to elect Republicans to the governors and to the governorship and to the attorney general position. You've seen it from Senator Tom Tillis saying that he will never defund the police. He will always have the back of law enforcement officials in a way that his opponent, Cal Cunningham, and Joe Biden won't. Now you're seeing it from the vice president and the president, who are making routine stops here in North Carolina. Donald Trump visited on Wednesday. He announced that he'll be back next Tuesday to North Carolina. It really is a sharpening of the focus on Joe Biden. And I listened to a couple calls this week with the campaign, with the Trump campaign, who talked about not only you won't be safe in Joe Biden's America, but you won't be safe because he's being led around by leftist radicals and he cannot stand up to his own party. And so that seems to be the theme that the Republicans are going to use against Joe Biden for the rest of the way, I would think, is that he won't stand up to these violent elements of his own party.